The email came in at 7:42 a.m. I remember the timestamp because I was already at my desk, already halfway through my second cup of coffee, already reviewing the quarterly reports that no one else would open until the 10 o'clock meeting. The subject line was cheerful. Q4 performance bonuses, congratulations to our team. 53 names. I scrolled through them twice. My name wasn't there. I sat back in my chair and read it a third time slower. Not because I doubted what I was seeing, but because part of me needed a few extra seconds to accept that this wasn't a mistake. Bonus lists don't usually skip people by accident. They skip them by decision. And decisions like that are always made in rooms you're not invited to. I closed the email and looked at the office around me. Quiet, half-lit, the kind of stillness that only exists before the rest of the floor comes alive. I had been coming in at 7 for 11 years. Long enough to know exactly what silence like that felt like. My name is David Prescott. I'm 49 years old, and at that point, I had been the director of strategic operations at Halston Weiler Consulting for just over a decade. I ran the account portfolio that generated close to a third of the firm's annual revenue. 12 senior clients, some of whom had been with us since before I joined. Contracts I had personally negotiated. Relationships I had built one difficult conversation at a time, and now my name wasn't on a list that included interns who had been there for 6 months. At 9:15, I walked over to HR. Not aggressively, not with any particular urgency, just at my normal pace. The kind of pace that says nothing is wrong even when everything is. The HR director's name was Corinne Vance. Mid-50s, sharp, always pleasant in a way that felt slightly rehearsed. She looked up when I knocked on her open door, and for a fraction of a second before her professional smile clicked into place, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Recognition. She knew why I was there. That told me everything I needed to know. David, come in. What can I do for you? I stayed standing. I closed the door behind me, but I stayed standing. I noticed the bonus announcement went out this morning. She nodded slowly, like she was choosing each syllable in advance. Yes, it did. My name wasn't on it. There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough. Long enough for both of us to understand that the pause itself was an answer. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. I sat, but only because refusing would have made it harder for her to say what she had already decided to say. David, this year's bonus structure was based on very specific performance criteria. The compensation committee reviewed everything and made determinations based on strategic priorities going into next year. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Strategic priorities, determinations, compensation committee, words designed to sound neutral, words designed to feel like weather, like something that just happened to you rather than something someone chose to do. I had heard versions of this language before, but never aimed at me. That was the strange part. You spend years watching corporate vocabulary get deployed at other people, and you almost forget it can be used on you too. Can you help me understand the specific criteria I didn't meet? I asked. My voice was even, calm, the way I had trained it to be over 3 decades of managing difficult clients and impossible deadlines. Because the moment you raise your voice in a room like that, you become the problem, and the problem gets managed. I wasn't going to be managed. Not that day. Corinne looked down at her folder. She didn't open it. She didn't open the folder because she didn't need to. Whatever was inside had already been reviewed, discussed, and signed off on long before I walked through her door. That folder was a prop, a costume piece, something to look at when the eye contact became too heavy to hold. David, I don't have all the details in front of me right now, she said. Her voice was softer now, the way people speak when they're trying to make bad news feel like a shared experience. But I know the committee looked at revenue attribution, project scope, and forward-looking role definitions. Forward-looking role definitions. I almost repeated it back to her, just to hear how it sounded when it wasn't hiding behind her professional tone. Instead, I nodded, slowly, once. The way you nod when you've heard something you needed confirmed, not something you needed explained. Revenue attribution, I said. The Bellamy account renewed at $2.4 million last quarter. The Grierson merger consulting engagement closed at $1.8. Chen Industries expanded their retainer. Those are my accounts. Those are my numbers. Karen's smile tightened at the corners. David, no one is questioning your contributions. That phrase, no one is questioning your contributions. It's the corporate equivalent of thoughts and prayers. It costs nothing and means less. You hear it once, you almost believe it. You hear it 3 times across a decade, you understand what it actually means. It means the contribution has been noted, filed, and moved past. It means the conversation is already over even though you're still sitting in it. Then help me understand, I said, because I'm sitting here trying to reconcile no one questioning my contributions with my name not appearing on the list. She exhaled, just slightly, just enough to signal that the meeting was about to shift into a different kind of conversation. The kind where they stop pretending there's been a misunderstanding and start managing the fallout instead. There have been discussions, she said carefully, about the strategic direction of the operations division, some restructuring conversations, and the committee felt it was appropriate to align this year's bonuses with where the firm is heading, not necessarily where it's been. There it was, not a mistake, not an oversight, a direction. They had already decided something about my future, and this was how they were telling me. Not in a meeting, not in a review, in an absence, in a list that didn't include my name. Because when a company wants you to leave without them having to say so, they don't fire you. They just stop counting you. They let the silence do the work. I sat there for a moment, not angry, not shocked, just still. Because when you've spent 30 years in rooms like that, you start to recognize the temperature shift before the words arrive. And I had felt this one coming for weeks. I just hadn't wanted to name it. Karen, I said, is there something I should know about my role going forward? She hesitated. That hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that yes, there was something. Enough to confirm that whoever was in the loop, I wasn't in it. Enough to confirm that the bonus list wasn't the message, it was just the envelope. I think it would be worth having a conversation with Malcolm and Trevor next week, she said finally. They wanted to schedule some time to talk about the division's future. Malcolm Reeves, managing partner, Trevor Halston, founding partner, son of the founder, the name still on the door. 2 people who never asked to speak with a director unless something had already been decided. I stood up slowly, adjusted my jacket, thanked her for her time, the same way I had watched other people do it on other mornings before they disappeared from the org chart within a quarter. Now I understood what those exits had actually looked like from the inside. I walked back to my office the long way, past the trading desk area, past the junior consultant's bullpen, past the glass-walled conference room where someone had already set up for a client presentation that wasn't mine. I wasn't stalling. I was reading the room. Because when a company has decided something about you, the signs start appearing everywhere you look, and you can either pretend not to see them or you can start counting. I counted. 3 of my usual meeting invitations for the following week had been quietly moved off my calendar. I had noticed that morning but hadn't given it weight. Now I did. A strategic planning session I had chaired for the past 4 years was suddenly listed with Malcolm as the lead. The Bellamy Quarterly Review, my client, had a new attendee added last Friday, Trevor Halston. Trevor didn't attend account reviews. Trevor attended transitions. I sat down at my desk and pulled up my calendar in full week view. Then I pulled up the previous 3 weeks, then the 3 before that, and I started building a timeline in my head, not a list of grievances, a pattern, because patterns tell you things that individual events can't. A single skipped invitation is nothing. 12 of them spaced across 60 days is a decision that was made somewhere and is now working its way outward. I opened a new document, blank page, and I started typing. Not a resignation, not yet, something more useful, a record. Every client I managed, every contract renewal date, every personal relationship I had built that was tied to me and not to the firm. Every negotiation still in flight where the counterparty had specifically requested me as the point of contact. Every project timeline that would break if I stopped answering emails on a Tuesday. I filled 2 pages in under 40 minutes. Then I sat back and looked at what I had written. It was the shape of a hole. If I stepped out of it tomorrow, the hole would not fill itself. Not in a week, not in a quarter, maybe not ever, depending on how the clients reacted. And I understood something in that moment that I hadn't fully understood before. The bonus list wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't just a signal. It was a bet. Someone at the top had decided the firm could function without me. Someone had run the numbers, or thought they had, and concluded that the transition cost was acceptable, that the clients would stay, that the accounts would hold, that the deep architecture of 11 years of relationships would somehow survive being handed to someone with a lighter title and a fresh promotion. The question was whether they were right. I closed the document, saved it locally, and copied it to a personal drive. Not because I was planning anything, because I was preparing for the possibility that I might need to. There's a difference. Planning is action. Preparation is optionality. And after 30 years, I had learned that the people who survive corporate turbulence are almost always the ones who kept their options quietly organized in the background. At 11:20, Aaron Hollies knocked on my door frame. Aaron was one of the other directors. Sharp guy. Ran the healthcare vertical. We had come up together, joined the firm within 6 months of each other, and had spent enough late nights on enough proposals that I could read his face before he spoke. "You got a minute?" I nodded. He came in and closed the door behind him. That alone told me what the conversation was going to be about. Aaron didn't close doors for casual conversations. He sat down across from me, looked at the document still faintly visible on my second monitor. Didn't ask about it. Just leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor for a second before speaking. "You saw the list?" I nodded again. "Yeah," he said quietly. "So did I." I looked at him for a long moment before I answered, because Aaron's name had been on that list. I had checked. Not because I was tracking anyone else's compensation, but because when you scan a list looking for your own name and don't find it, your eyes keep moving and you start noticing what else is there. Aaron's name had been in the middle of the list, right between two senior consultants. His bonus was probably fine. Whatever was bothering him wasn't about the money. "You were on it," I said carefully. He nodded once. "I was, barely." I waited. Aaron wasn't the kind of person who came into someone's office to talk about his own bonus. He was the kind of person who came in when he had already done the math on something bigger and needed a second set of eyes to confirm he wasn't imagining it. "Mine was cut by 32%, he said, year over year. I ran the healthcare division to record margins. 3 new client wins, 2 expansions, and they cut me by a third." He paused. "Marcus got a bump, same tier as me, same title. His division underperformed against target by 11%. Marcus Chen, head of the financial services vertical, a Malcolm Reeves loyalist, the kind of director who spent more time in the managing partner's office than in his own. I had watched him for 3 years, and I had learned to recognize the shape of political capital when I saw it moving through a room. "So it's not just me," I said. Aaron looked up. "No, it's not just you, and I don't think it's just me either." He exhaled. "I've been asking around, quietly, Carla in tax, Ray's in the litigation support group. Both got flat. No adjustment. Ray's hasn't been flat since he joined. His group's billings are up 19%. I sat back in my chair, because now the picture was starting to come into focus, and it wasn't the picture I had been building in my head an hour ago. This wasn't a decision about me. Or rather, it wasn't only a decision about me. There was something larger happening underneath the surface, and my name being missing from the list was one visible edge of it. The rest was still submerged. "What do you think it is?" I asked. Aaron looked at the door, then back at me. "I think Malcolm and Trevor are consolidating. I think they've decided which divisions matter and which ones don't, and they've decided who they want running things going forward. And I think they're pushing everyone else out slowly enough that no one can say they were pushed." That last part was the key, slowly enough, because if they cut people directly, they would owe severance. They would trigger notice periods. They would create a paper trail. But if they starved people out, bonus by bonus, invitation by invitation, meeting by meeting, then people would leave on their own. And when people leave on their own, the company owes them nothing. It was elegant in a way, cold but elegant. The kind of strategy that only works if the people you're starving out don't figure out what's happening until they've already gone quietly, or if they figure it out and are too tired, too worn down, too focused on staying afloat to organize. Have you talked to anyone else? I asked. Aaron shook his head. Just you. I wanted to see how you were reading it before I said anything to Reyes or Carla. I nodded slowly. Because he had come to me first, which meant something. It meant Aaron trusted my read on the room more than he trusted his own. It meant he was looking for someone to think alongside him. And it meant that whatever came next, there was at least the possibility of not going through it alone. Give me until tomorrow morning, I said. Let me think. Aaron nodded, stood up, and left as quietly as he had come in. I sat there for a while after the door clicked shut, watching the light shift across the carpet. Because the conversation had changed the shape of the problem. An hour earlier, I had been dealing with a single decision made about a single person. Now I was dealing with something else entirely. A strategy, a pattern. A quiet, disciplined reshaping of the firm that had probably been in motion for months, maybe longer, and that I had failed to see because I had been too busy doing my actual job. That's the trap. That's the trap they count on. When you're the person who runs the accounts, closes the deals, fixes the client issues, you don't have time to watch the political weather. You assume the work speaks for itself. You assume the results are the argument. And meanwhile, other people are having conversations you're not invited to, drawing lines you can't see, deciding futures that include everyone except you. I opened my laptop again and started a new document. Not a resignation letter. Not a list of clients. Something more specific. A map. I wrote down every director-level person in the firm. 31 names. Then I marked each one with what I knew about their most recent bonus, their access to leadership, their inclusion in strategy sessions, the state of their division. I filled in what I knew and I left question marks where I didn't. Then I stepped back and looked at the pattern. There were roughly 3 clusters. The first cluster was small, 6 names. Marcus Chen was on it. So were 2 other Malcolm loyalists and Trevor's brother-in-law, who ran the real estate advisory group despite having no discernible qualifications. These were the people getting bumps, the people whose calendars were filling with strategic sessions, the people whose divisions were being described as the future. The second cluster was medium-sized, about 12 names. These were the neutrals. People whose bonuses were flat or slightly up, whose divisions weren't being praised but weren't being starved. They were the middle. They would survive whatever transition was coming, but they wouldn't be part of shaping it. They would be inherited by the new order. The third cluster was the largest, 13 names, directors whose bonuses had been cut, frozen, or in my case, eliminated, directors whose meetings were being reassigned, directors whose divisions weren't being called out as underperforming, because that would have required a paper trail, but who were being quietly moved to the edges of every conversation that mattered. Aaron was in that third cluster. So was Reyes. So was Carla. So was I, and when I looked at the 13 names together, I saw something Aaron had already seen but hadn't fully articulated. These weren't the underperformers. These were the highest billing directors in the firm outside of Marcus Chen's protected orbit. These were the people who ran the accounts that actually generated revenue, which meant Malcolm and Trevor weren't just consolidating. They were consolidating in a way that assumed the revenue would follow the firm's name, not the individuals attached to it. That was the bet. That was the whole bet, that the clients belonged to Halston Weiler and not to us. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The afternoon light had that flat, gray quality it gets in November when the sun stops trying. I thought about the Bellamy account. About Alina Bellamy specifically, the CFO who had personally called me at 10 at night on a Sunday 2 years ago when their acquisition target had tried to renegotiate at the last minute. I had talked her through it for 90 minutes. She had thanked me at Christmas. She had sent a bottle of wine to my house. Alina Bellamy did not have a relationship with Halston Weiler Consulting. Alina Bellamy had a relationship with me, and I was fairly certain the same was true of at least 8 of my other clients. That night I didn't go straight home. I drove instead. Not anywhere in particular. Just out along the parkway that runs north from the office, past the reservoir, past the exit I would have taken if I were going home. I kept driving for another 40 minutes, letting the road do the thinking my office had been too full of noise for, because a decision was forming and I wanted to feel it settle before I committed to it. Real decisions don't announce themselves. They accumulate. And by the time I turned around, I already knew what the next week was going to look like. I got home at 9:15. My wife, Diane, was in the kitchen finishing a glass of wine and reading something on her tablet. She looked up when I came in, took one look at my face, and set the tablet down. 22 years of marriage teaches you to read a room in about half a second. What happened? I told her. All of it, the list, the meeting with Karen, the conversation with Aaron, the map I had built in the afternoon, the names in the third cluster, the clients, Elena Bellamy, the bet Malcolm and Trevor were making about who the clients actually belonged to. I laid it all out on the kitchen counter the way I would have laid out a client problem, and I watched her listen. Diane didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She just listened the whole way through, occasionally nodding, occasionally taking a small sip of wine. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So what are you actually asking?" I hadn't asked anything. But she was right. There was a question underneath everything I had just said, and I hadn't spoken it out loud yet, because saying it out loud made it real. "I'm asking whether I should leave." She nodded slowly. "And what are you asking underneath that?" That was the part I hadn't wanted to look at directly, because leaving was one decision, but there was another decision hiding behind it. Whether to leave alone, quietly, professionally, the way people in the third cluster were expected to leave, one at a time without noise, or whether to leave the way the pattern actually called for, together, coordinated, in a way that made the bet Malcolm and Trevor had made visible to everyone at once. Whether to go alone, I said, or whether to talk to Aaron and Reyes and Carla. She looked at me for a long moment. "David, I've watched you spend 11 years at that firm carrying things nobody else could carry. You've come home at midnight. You've missed birthdays. You've taken calls on vacation. You've done all of it because you believed the work mattered and the people mattered. And now they've told you in the clearest way they know how that they don't think you matter enough to write your name on a list." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I'll tell you this. If you go alone and quietly, you'll spend the next 10 years wondering whether you should have said something. And if you do say something, whatever happens next, you'll know you did it with your eyes open." I didn't answer right away, because she had said what I already knew but hadn't wanted to admit to myself. I had spent my entire career being the person who took care of other people quietly. Aaron had come to my office that morning because he trusted me to think clearly. Reyes and Carla didn't know yet, but if the pattern was what I thought it was, they were going to face the same choice within weeks. And if I walked out alone without saying a word, they would each face it in isolation. Sometimes silence is discretion. Sometimes silence is complicity. The difference is who else is standing in the dark with you. I called Aaron the next morning at 6:40. Early enough that I knew he'd be up but not yet at the office. He answered on the second ring. He'd been waiting. "I've been thinking," I said. "I want to talk, not at the office. Can you meet me at the diner on Fenmore in half an hour? I'll be there." The diner on Fenmore was the kind of place where nobody from Halston Weiler would ever set foot. Sticky menus, coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since Tuesday, booths with cracked vinyl seats. Perfect. Aaron was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner booth with his back to the wall. Old habit. He was the kind of person who noticed when someone came in. I slid into the seat across from him. A waitress poured coffee without asking. I waited until she was out of range before I spoke. "I built something yesterday afternoon, after you left." I pulled out a folded piece of paper, not the laptop. I wasn't going to have this conversation on anything that could be logged. It's a map, every director, what I know about their bonuses, their access, their meetings. He looked at it, read it slowly. His face didn't change, but I saw his jaw work once. He put it down and pushed his coffee cup slightly to the side, the way people do when they're clearing space for something more important than what's on the table. "How many in the bottom cluster?" 13. "And what do the 13 have in common?" "They generate roughly 62% of the firm's billings outside of Marcus's division." He nodded slowly. He had already suspected. My map just confirmed it in a shape he could point to. He took another look at the paper, then folded it back up and slid it across to me. Nothing about him needed to keep it. He had it now. "So what are you thinking?" he asked. I took a breath, because this was the moment where the conversation stopped being observation and started being a decision. Once I said the next sentence, it was going to be real. Aaron and I would either move together or we would move apart, but we wouldn't be able to unhear it. "I think I'm leaving," I said. "And I think if I leave, my clients come with me. Not because I'll pull them, because they'll follow. And I think if you're honest with yourself about your book, you know the same is true for you." Aaron didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the parking lot. A truck was idling by the dumpster. Somewhere behind us, a coffee grinder started up. "Yeah," he said finally, "I know. I'm not asking you to leave with me. That's not what this is. But I think Rays needs to know what's happening. And Carla, and whoever else you trust in that bottom cluster. Not to organize anything. Just to make sure that whatever choice each person makes, they make it with the same information." He looked at me for a long moment. "David, if 4 directors walk out in the same week, that's not 13 people making individual choices. That's a signal to the clients, to the market, to everyone else still inside the firm. I know. And Malcolm and Trevor will call it coordination. They'll try to make it look like something it isn't. They can call it whatever they want. If 4 of us leave in the same week and take our books with us, the story tells itself. The numbers speak. They always do." He drank his coffee, set the cup down, looked at me across the table, and in that look I saw something I had seen in him 100 times before over years of impossible deadlines and late-night proposals. The look of a person deciding quietly that he was in. "Okay," he said. "Who talks to Rays?" "I will," I said. "You take Carla. She trusts you more than she trusts me, and we don't push. Either of them. Whatever they decide, they decide. We just make sure they have the same picture." Aaron nodded. We finished our coffee without talking about it further. There wasn't anything more to say. The plan was small enough to fit inside 2 sentences and big enough to reshape the next quarter of our lives. I met Rays that afternoon in the parking garage. Not planned exactly. I had seen his calendar and knew he had a 2:15 offsite. I waited by the elevator at 2:05. When he stepped out, he did a small double take. "David, walk with me to your car." He didn't ask why. Rays had spent 9 years running litigation support at Halston Weiler, and before that he had spent 12 years as a paralegal at a firm where he had watched 3 senior partners get pushed out through exactly the mechanism I was about to describe. He knew what quiet decisions sounded like. I laid it out for him in the 4 minutes it took to walk to his car. The bonus pattern. The meeting reassignments. The 3 clusters. The math on the 3rd cluster's billings. I didn't tell him what to do. I told him what I was seeing, and I told him Aaron and I were talking to a few other people who might want the same information. He listened without interrupting. When we got to his car, he put his hand on the door handle but didn't open it. He stood there for a moment looking down at the concrete. "My bonus was flat," he said. "4th year in a row I've grown the division. Flat. I told my wife it was the market. I knew it wasn't the market." "I know." He looked up at me. "How many people know what you just told me?" "Right now 3, you make 4. "Who else are you talking to?" "Aaron is talking to Carla. That's it for today. Whatever happens from there depends on what people want to do with the information." He nodded slowly. Then he opened the car door, but before he got in he said one more thing. "David, my wife's been telling me for 6 months that something's wrong. I kept telling her I was imagining it. Thank you for confirming I'm not." He got in the car, rolled down the window. "I need 48 hours. Take them." By Wednesday morning, the temperature inside the office had shifted in a way that only people who had been there long enough would notice. Nothing loud. Nothing anyone could point to, just a slight tightening in certain hallways, a few doors closing that usually stayed open. Aaron had spoken to Carla Monday night at her house. Carla had spoken to me Tuesday morning in a corner of the parking lot. She was in. She didn't need 48 hours. She had been ready for months and hadn't known who to say it to. By Wednesday afternoon, Rays had called me from his personal phone. One sentence. "I'm out by Friday." That was it. He hung up before I could respond. So it was 4. Me, Aaron, Carla, Rays. 4 directors from the bottom cluster, representing between us the healthcare vertical, litigation support, tax, and my strategic operations portfolio. 4 people whose combined book of business represented, by my rough math, close to 41% of the firm's annual billings outside of Marcus Chen's division. 4 resignations that would land inside the same 72-hour window. We didn't plan the timing, not exactly. We simply agreed that whoever was ready would move and that nobody would wait for anyone else. But the timing landed the way it landed because the pattern was the pattern. When 4 people all recognize the same exit at the same time, they don't need coordination. The situation coordinates them. Thursday morning, I drafted my resignation letter. I kept it short, 3 paragraphs. No accusations, no grievances, no reference to the bonus list. Just a professional notice effective in 2 weeks with an offer to help with transition on the accounts I managed. I read it twice, saved it, and closed the laptop. The letter was the easy part. The hard part had already been done in the diner and the parking garage and the kitchen the week before. I sent it at 8:03 Thursday morning. To Malcolm, to Trevor, copied to Corinne. No dramatic timing, no strategic hour. Just early enough that they would see it before their first meetings and have time to think about how they wanted to respond. Malcolm's assistant called me at 8:41. Could I come to his office at 9:15? I said yes. At 9:07, Aaron sent his resignation. He copied me. I didn't respond. At 9:12, walking down the hallway to Malcolm's office, I passed Carla in the corridor. She gave me a small nod, nothing more. She hit send at 9:14 from her office, 30 seconds before I sat down across from Malcolm. Malcolm Reeves was in his mid-60s. Silver hair, tailored suit, the kind of watch that people notice even when they're pretending not to. He had built a version of himself over 4 decades that was designed to command rooms. He gestured for me to sit. Trevor was already there, standing by the window with his arms crossed. Corinne was in the chair to the left, folder in her lap, unopened. David, Malcolm began, I want to understand what's happening. I sent a resignation letter this morning. I think it's fairly clear. I don't mean your letter, I mean Aaron Holly's, who resigned 9 minutes ago, and Carla Whitfield, who apparently resigned in the last 3 minutes. My phone is telling me things I don't understand. I looked at him, just looked, because he did understand. He understood exactly. What he wanted to know was whether I would say it out loud, whether I would give him the version of the story he could use to spin it into something manageable, coordination, organized departure, something with a name and a shape he could push back against. I wasn't going to give him that. I can only speak to my own decision, I said. The others will speak to theirs. Trevor turned from the window. David, don't insult us. I'm not insulting anyone. I'm resigning. I've given 2 weeks. I've offered transition support on my accounts. Anything beyond that isn't mine to discuss. Malcolm leaned forward. The bonus decision, if that's what this is about, there's flexibility. We can revisit the committee's determination. There it was. 12 months of frozen conversations, 3 years of stability, 1 skipped name on a list, and suddenly there was flexibility. Suddenly the committee's determinations were reviewable. Suddenly the compensation structure could bend, because the numbers had changed, not the numbers in a spreadsheet, the numbers of people walking out the door. Malcolm, I said quietly, I appreciate that, but my decision isn't about the bonus. It's about what the bonus told me. And what the bonus told me isn't something you can walk back with a revised offer. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he sat back. Corinne's phone buzzed on her lap. She glanced at it, then at Malcolm. Her face went slightly still. Malcolm noticed. Trevor noticed. She hesitated, then said quietly, Malcolm, Ray's just sent a letter as well. Trevor exhaled hard through his nose and turned back to the window. I sat there in the silence for a moment, not triumphant, not vindicated, just present. Because this was the moment where the strategy they had been running for months met the reality of the people it depended on. And now they were doing math they hadn't planned to do this quickly. I should get back to my desk, I said, and I stood up. Nobody stopped me. I walked out of Malcolm's office at 9:34 on a Thursday morning, and the hallway outside felt different than it had 30 minutes earlier. Not because anything visible had changed. The carpet was the same, the light through the windows was the same, the low hum of printers and phones was the same. but the architecture underneath had shifted. 4 support beams had been pulled at once, and the building was still standing because buildings always look fine in the first few seconds after the structural math changes. The rest of Thursday was quiet in the way that only precedes something loud. Aaron and I passed each other twice in the hallway and didn't speak. Carla was already gone by lunch. Reyes had left the building at 9:45. By Friday morning, the phone tree had started. Clients had begun calling. Not because we had reached out, because word travels in professional networks faster than any internal announcement, and by Friday morning half a dozen general counsels and CFOs had heard some version of the news and wanted to know what it meant for their accounts. Elena Bellamy called me at 11:20 Friday, on my cell. She had somehow already gotten the number. "David, is it true? It's true. Where are you going?" "I don't have that answer yet. I've given notice. I haven't signed anywhere." There was a pause. Then she said, "When you know, tell me, because wherever you're going, we're going. I'll have my legal team look at the contract language on Monday." I thanked her, told her I appreciated it more than I could say. And when I hung up, I sat there for a long moment because Elena's call was not the last of its kind that day. It was the third. By the time I left the office Friday evening, 7 of my 12 accounts had called me directly. Aaron told me later he had received 4 calls. Reyes had received 5. Carla had received 3, plus a personal note from the general counsel of her largest client, hand-delivered to her house. The story didn't need to be told. The numbers told it themselves. I found out the following Wednesday, through an old contact, that Malcolm and Trevor had called an emergency partners meeting Monday morning, that Marcus Chen had presented a stabilization plan, that the plan assumed the clients would stay, that by Tuesday afternoon, they were already revising the assumptions because the client calls were going the other direction. I heard the phrase, revenue exposure of approximately 38% from someone who had been in the room. I don't know if the number was exact. It didn't need to be. 6 weeks later, Aaron, Reyes, Carla, and I sat around a table at a small firm 2 towns over that had been quietly reaching out to each of us separately for months. We hadn't planned to end up at the same firm. It just happened that the same shop had seen what Malcolm and Trevor had missed, which was that the 4 of us represented something rare, and that a firm willing to build around the 4 of us could reshape its own trajectory in a single quarter. I don't tell this story often. When I do, people usually want to know if I feel vindicated. I don't. Vindication is a small emotion. What I feel is something quieter than that. I feel like I finally understood at 49 years old that the work you do is never the whole story. The rooms you're invited to and the rooms you're not, the lists you're on and the lists you're not, those are the story. And when the rooms and the lists start telling you something, the mistake is pretending you didn't hear it. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Sometimes the most important decision we make is refusing to be invisible.